Imagine stepping onto a flight, ready to embark on your journey, only to be stopped not because of a security concern, not because of an error, but because of the color of your skin. For Mia Johnson, a poised and accomplished professional, what should have been an ordinary day of travel turned into a confrontation that would not only challenge her dignity, but also shake the foundations of an entire industry. Mia, dressed impeccably in her tailored navy suit, approached the boarding gate with calm confidence. But as she handed over her first-class ticket, the pilot, Captain Andrew Sloan, stepped forward with a condescending smirk. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked, his words laced with thinly veiled prejudice. The humiliation was undeniable, the murmurs from other passengers only adding to the sting. But little did Captain Sloan know, Mia wasn't just anyone. With quiet resolve, she picked up her phone and made a call. The man who answered wasn't just her husband. He was Ethan Johnson, the owner of the very airline Captain Sloan worked for. What happened next would spark a series of events that transformed not only the lives of Mia and Ethan, but also the entire airline industry. It was a story about justice, karma, and the power of standing up for what's right. Stay with us as we delve into the dramatic confrontation, the fallout, and the remarkable changes that followed. This is a tale of resilience and reform, proving that sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to extraordinary change. Mia Johnson was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Tall, elegant, and impeccably dressed, she exuded confidence and grace. As a senior executive at a leading tech firm, she was no stranger to high-pressure environments or navigating spaces where she was often the only black woman in the room. Years of perseverance and success had sharpened her resolve, but no amount of experience could fully prepare her for what was about to unfold. The airport buzzed with the typical pre-flight energy announcements crackling over the speakers, families reuniting, and business travelers shuffling between calls and coffee cups. Flight 717 to Aspen was boarding, and Mia approached the gate with her usual poise. The clicks of her polished heels echoed against the terminal floor as she pulled her sleek carry-on bag behind her. Handing her first-class ticket to the young gate agent, Mia offered a polite smile. The agent hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at Captain Andrew Sloan, who stood nearby. Sloan was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of arrogant authority. He leaned casually against the counter, his piercing gaze fixed on Mia. "First class?" the gate agent asked, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Mia replied calmly, her tone leaving no room for doubt. But before the agent could scan her ticket, Captain Sloan stepped forward, his smirk barely concealed. "Excuse me," he said, his voice thick with condescension. "Ma'am, are you sure you're at the right gate?" Mia's dark eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "Quite sure," she replied evenly. The atmosphere grew tense as passengers nearby exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered, others avoided eye contact altogether. "It's just unusual," Sloan continued, letting the words hang in the air. "We don't often see first-class passengers like—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Mia's lips tightened into a thin line, her composure unbroken. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked, her tone sharp but controlled. Sloan folded his arms, his smug expression unshaken. "We've had some incidents lately," he said vaguely. "I like to make sure everything is in order on my flights. Protocol, you know." Mia's jaw tightened, but she refused to let her anger show. Years of enduring microaggressions had taught her to remain composed under pressure. Instead, she reached into her bag and calmly pulled out her phone. "I'll contact my husband," she said simply, her voice steady. Sloan chuckled mockingly. "By all means," he sneered, clearly convinced he held the upper hand. What Sloan didn't realize was that this phone call would soon unravel everything he thought he controlled. Mia stood tall, her calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside. She pressed her phone to her ear, dialing the number she knew by heart. Despite the tension in the air and the murmurs of curious passengers around her, her voice was steady. "Ethan," she said, her tone unwavering but tinged with steel, "I need you at gate 10, now." On the other end of the line, Ethan Johnson's voice was firm, laced with immediate concern. "What's wrong?" he asked, already sensing that this wasn't just a routine call. "You'll see when you get here," Mia replied. "But I need you here, urgently." Mia ended the call and returned her phone to her bag, her posture unbroken. She stepped aside, giving the crowd room to move, but remained in clear view of Captain Sloan. Her composed silence was more powerful than any words she could have spoken. Captain Sloan leaned casually against the counter, his smirk growing wider. "No one's coming to save you," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. Mia didn't flinch. She simply folded her arms and waited, her calm demeanor unnerving the pilot more than he cared to admit. Minutes passed, and the tension at the gate was palpable. Passengers whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Then, the air seemed to shift. Ethan Johnson strode into the terminal, his presence commanding and unmistakable. Dressed in a tailored suit, his confident gait and sharp gaze parted the crowd with ease. At over 6 feet tall, with a build that exuded authority, Ethan was not a man to be ignored. As his eyes locked on Mia, his expression softened for a moment, a brief flicker of concern for his wife. But as his gaze shifted to Captain Sloan, his features hardened into a mask of quiet intensity. "Mia," Ethan said as he reached her, his voice low and steady, a contrast to the chaos around them. "Ethan," she replied, her tone calm but laced with relief she wouldn't admit. Captain Sloan watched the interaction with growing unease. Still, he didn't recognize Ethan, or at least, not yet. Ethan turned to the gate agent first. "I'd like an explanation for why my wife is being prevented from boarding her flight," he said, his voice calm, but cutting. The young agent stammered, his gaze darting nervously to Captain Sloan, who stepped forward with feigned confidence. "I was just ensuring passenger safety," Sloan said smoothly, his tone laced with arrogance. "We've had some incidents recently, and I wanted to verify her credentials." Ethan's jaw tightened as his sharp eyes bore into Sloan. "Her credentials?" he repeated, his tone sharpening. "You mean her valid ticket, which your staff has already confirmed?" Sloan hesitated, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. "I don't have to explain my decisions to you," he said dismissively. Ethan took a deliberate step closer, his presence towering over the captain. "Oh, but you do," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You see, I'm Ethan Johnson, owner of this airline, and you've just humiliated my wife in front of a terminal full of passengers. The words in the restaurant logic alone tell you that something's afoot. That and the fact that you've lacked energy." The color drained from Sloan's face. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the gate agent's jaw dropped. Sloan stammered, his bravado crumbling. Ethan didn't give him a chance to recover. "Your actions today have not only disrespected my wife, but have jeopardized the integrity of this company," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I demand a full explanation, and I expect it now." Sloan fumbled for words, but all he could manage was, I was following protocol." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Don't insult my intelligence by hiding behind protocol. This isn't about safety. This is about your prejudice, plain and simple." And the pilot's face flushed red, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan raised a hand to silence him. "Security," Ethan said, gesturing to the airline staff nearby. "Escort Captain Sloan off the premises immediately. Consider this his last day in uniform." The terminal fell into stunned silence. The gate agent scrambled to comply, summoning security officers who arrived within moments. Sloan's protest grew louder as they led him away, his voice fading into the background. The passengers, still processing what they had witnessed, began to clap, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Ethan turned back to Mia, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for her. Mia nodded, her composure unbroken. "I am now." Ethan turned to the gate agent. "Ensure that my wife is boarded first and provided every courtesy," he instructed. "Yes, sir," the agent stammered, his hands trembling as he scanned Mia's ticket. As Mia walked toward the boarding tunnel, Ethan lingered to ensure everything was handled properly. Then, Without another word, he followed his wife onto the plane, leaving a room full of astonished passengers behind. In that moment, the seeds of change were planted. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate Mia had become a catalyst for transformation, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of that airport terminal. As the plane began boarding, the whispers among passengers at Gate 10 grew louder. Some clapped hesitantly. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, processing what had just unfolded. A few discreetly captured the moment on their phones, the confrontation between Captain Sloan and Ethan Johnson, already destined to make waves far beyond the airport terminal. Mia remained composed, her expression calm but her mind restless. She adjusted the strap of her bag and walked toward the boarding tunnel, her back straight, refusing to let the earlier humiliation weigh her down. Her years of experience navigating uncomfortable situations had taught her to carry herself with dignity, no matter the circumstances. Ethan stayed close behind, his protective presence and unspoken reassurance. Though his expression remained composed, his jaw was tight and his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. He had handled the situation, but the gravity of what had happened was not lost on him. As they settled into their plush first-class seats, the applause from the gate still echoed faintly in their minds. Mia adjusted her scarf, the soft silk a gift from Ethan, and glanced out the window at the golden light of the setting sun. For a moment, the tranquility outside seemed at odds with the storm of emotions swirling within her. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked softly, leaning closer. His voice, so steady and firm earlier, now carried a trace of vulnerability. Mia gave him a small smile, her poise unbroken. "I'm fine," she said simply, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her lingering frustration. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, his concern deepening. "This wasn't just about you, Mia," he said after a moment, his tone measured. "This was about something bigger, something we can't ignore." She turned to face him, her gaze steady but thoughtful. "I know," she admitted. "I've dealt with men like Sloan before. They see someone like me and assume I don't belong. But this isn't just my story, Ethan. It's the story of countless others who faced the same prejudice without anyone to step in for them." Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. "That's why we can't let this end here," he said firmly. "We have the resources, the platform, the power to change things, and I want you to lead it." Mia blinked, caught off guard by his suggestion. "Me? No one understands this better than you," Ethan said. "You've lived it. You can make sure no one else has to go through what you did today." Mia sat back, her mind racing. As the hum of the engines filled the cabin, a realization took root within her. This was bigger than her, and if she could turn her pain into a force for change, she was ready to do it. The morning after the incident, Mia Johnson sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open to a blank document. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside her as she stared at the screen, her thoughts racing. The humiliation she had faced at the gate wasn't an isolated event, she knew that much. It was a symptom of a much larger problem, one that required action, not just outrage. Ethan entered the kitchen, adjusting his cufflinks as he prepared for the day ahead. He paused when he saw the tension in Mia's posture. "You're still thinking about yesterday," he said, his tone gentle but knowing. "It's not just about yesterday," Mia replied, turning to face him. "It's about what it represents. What happened wasn't just one man's prejudice. It's a reflection of a culture that allows people like him to thrive." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. "That's why I meant what I said on the plane. I want you to lead this effort, Mia. This airline needs someone like you to ensure real change happens." Her gaze softened as she considered his words. "If I do this," she said firmly, "it won't be for appearances. I want full control to create meaningful policies, ones that hold everyone accountable, from the ground crew to the executive team." "You'll have it," Ethan promised without hesitation. A week later, Mia stood at the head of the airline's executive conference room, her presence commanding. The sleek, glass-walled space overlooked the city skyline, but the view was the last thing on anyone's mind. The executives, mostly men in suits, sat around the table, their expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to outright skepticism. "Let me start by saying this," Mia began, her voice calm but firm. "What happened to me at Gate 10 wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a systemic issue within this company, one we've ignored for far too long." A murmur rippled through the room as several executives exchanged glances. Mia continued, undeterred. "We pride ourselves on being a world-class airline, but how can we claim that title when our policies and culture fail to reflect our values? Discrimination isn't just unethical, it's bad for business. Starting today, that changes." One of the executives, a middle-aged man named Richard, leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "With all due respect, Mrs. Johnson, overhauling an entire culture is a monumental task. These changes could disrupt operations and morale, and even—" Mia met his gaze, unflinching. "Tolerating discrimination is what's truly disruptive," she countered. "Every day we delay is another day a passenger or employee faces injustice. We can't afford complacency." Another executive, a younger woman named Julia, spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, her tone measured but curious. Mia nodded, grateful for the question. "First, we'll implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for every employee, from the C-suite to the cleaning staff. This training won't be a one-time event, but an ongoing program to address unconscious bias and build cultural awareness." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Mia pressed on. "Second, we're launching an anonymous reporting system managed by a third party. This will allow employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Transparency and accountability are non-negotiable." "And third," she said, her tone hardening slightly, "we're establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Any employee found to engage in prejudiced behavior, regardless of their position, will face immediate consequences, up to and including termination." The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. Richard cleared his throat, his expression still skeptical. "These are ambitious changes, Mrs. Johnson, but how do you plan to measure success?" Mia's lips curved into a faint smile. "We measure it by the experiences of our employees and passengers," she said. "We'll conduct regular surveys, monitor complaints, and track the diversity of our workforce at every level. This isn't just about compliance, it's about transformation." Julia leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "What about leadership accountability?" she asked. "If we want this to work, it has to start at the top." Mia nodded. "Absolutely. That's why I'll personally oversee the development and implementation of these programs, and I expect every executive in this room to lead by example." Richard frowned but said nothing. Julia, on the other hand, nodded in agreement. "I think Mrs. Johnson makes an excellent point," she said. "If we want to remain competitive, we need to show our employees and customers that we're serious about these changes." Mia's gaze swept across the room. "Change is never easy," she said, her voice softening but still firm. "But ask yourselves this. Do we want to be an airline that reacts to discrimination after it happens, or do we want to be leaders in preventing it?" Michael grabbed her shoulders. The room remained silent, but Mia could see the gears turning in the minds of those present. That evening, Mia returned home, exhausted but resolute. Ethan greeted her with a warm smile, handing her a glass of wine. "How did it go?" he asked. "There was resistance," Mia admitted, sinking into the couch. "But there was also support. It's a start." Ethan sat beside her, his hand resting on hers. "You've already done more in one day than most people do in years," he said. Mia smiled faintly. "It's only the beginning," she said, "but I'm ready for the fight." Ethan nodded, his admiration clear. "And I'll be with you every step of the way." As Mia leaned back, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing an airline, it was about reshaping an entire culture. And she was ready to lead the charge. The early days of implementing Mia Johnson's diversity and inclusion initiative were anything but smooth. While the training sessions began rolling out across the airline, resistance from staff and leadership surfaced in subtle but telling ways. Side comments, disengaged attitudes, and occasional outright skepticism. But Mia was undeterred. Change isn't comfortable, she told her team during a strategy meeting. If it were, it wouldn't be necessary. This is about creating a workplace and an experience for passengers where everyone feels respected and valued. One incident tested her resolve just a few weeks into the program. At Gate 25, a black man in a tailored suit was stopped by a gate agent who questioned the validity of his first-class ticket. The passenger, Mr. Anthony Carter, remained composed but visibly frustrated as he explained that his ticket and ID had already been scanned. When Mia received the call about the situation, she immediately went to the gate. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she approached, flanked by a security officer and a supervisor. "What's going on here?" Mia asked, her voice calm but firm, as she addressed the gate agent, a young woman named Claire. Claire hesitated, her eyes darting between Mia and Mr. Carter. I thought his ticket might be fraudulent," she stammered. "We've been trained to look for suspicious activity." Mia's expression hardened. "And what exactly about Mr. Carter's ticket or his appearance seemed suspicious to you?" Claire faltered, her silence speaking volumes. Turning to Mr. Carter, Mia's tone softened. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of this airline, I deeply apologize for this experience. This is not who we are striving to be." She instructed the supervisor to upgrade his seat and ensure he received every courtesy. Mia then addressed Claire privately. "Mistakes happen," she said, her tone measured but firm. "But accountability is key. You'll be required to undergo additional training, and this incident will be reviewed by HR." Though the incident was upsetting, it also underscored the progress being made. Under the old policies, such behavior might have gone unchallenged. Now, with Mia's leadership, there was a clear protocol for addressing these moments and ensuring accountability. Small victories began to accumulate. Employee surveys showed growing trust in the anonymous reporting system. Staff members started sharing their own stories during training sessions, fostering empathy and understanding. And passengers, like Mr. Carter, began speaking out in support of the airline's efforts. Still, the work was far from over. Mia knew that true change wouldn't happen overnight. But as she reflected on each success, no matter how small, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Each step forward was proof that the fight was worth it. Mia Johnson's bold initiative to transform her airline wasn't just making waves within the company, it was reshaping the entire aviation industry. As word spread about the changes she implemented, her name became synonymous with progress and accountability. Industry leaders began to take notice. Articles in prominent business publications hailed her efforts as a blueprint for tackling systemic bias in corporate America. Passengers, who had once silently endured discrimination, now felt empowered to share their experiences, while employees across the airline voiced their appreciation for a culture shift that felt long overdue. Mia's work quickly garnered national attention. She was invited to join a federal task force aimed at combating discrimination across all modes of transportation. The task force, composed of policymakers, industry executives, and diversity experts, was tasked with setting new standards for inclusion and equity. Mia, with her first-hand experience and clear vision, became a central voice in shaping these policies. "It's not just about one company," Mia said during a task force meeting. "It's about creating a framework that ensures dignity and respect for everyone, no matter where they're traveling or who they are." Mia's influence extended beyond her airline. Competing carriers began reaching out, eager to learn from her success. Several airlines adopted similar diversity training programs, anonymous reporting systems, and zero-tolerance policies for discrimination. Mia welcomed these inquiries, seeing them not as competition, but as an opportunity to further the mission of equity across the industry. The pinnacle of her growing influence came when Mia was invited to deliver a keynote speech at the Global Aviation Summit. The event, attended by CEOs, executives, and policymakers from around the world, provided her with a platform to inspire broader change. Standing on the brightly lit stage, Mia addressed the packed auditorium with calm confidence. "Diversity isn't just a corporate buzzword," she began. "It's the foundation of trust, growth, and innovation. For too long, Systemic bias has been an invisible barrier in our industry, stifling progress and alienating customers. It's time to tear that barrier down. She outlined the steps her airline had taken and the impact those changes were already making. Her speech concluded with a challenge to the audience. We can no longer afford to react to discrimination after it happens. We must lead with intention, accountability, and courage to prevent it altogether. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Leaders from around the world approached her afterward, eager to collaborate and learn. For Mia, the moment was both humbling and motivating. Her journey had started with one humiliating incident, but it had evolved into a movement for systemic change, proof that one determined individual could spark an industry-wide revolution. Late one evening, Mia Johnson sat on the balcony of her home, the city lights twinkling in the distance. A gentle breeze rustled her scarf, a gift from Ethan, as she sipped a cup of tea, and reflected on the whirlwind months since the incident at Gate 10. Despite the growing recognition for her work and the tangible progress being made, there were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Ethan stepped out to join her, carrying a warm blanket. He draped it over her shoulders and took a seat beside her. "You're thinking again," he said with a soft smile, his voice a calming presence. "I can't help it," Mia replied, her tone tinged with exhaustion. "There's still so much to do. For every victory, it feels like there's a new battle waiting." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. "That's because you're leading something bigger than both of us," he said. "But you're not doing it alone. I'm here, always." Mia looked at him, her expression softening. "You've been my rock through all of this," she admitted. "Even when I was ready to give up, you believed in me." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. The words brought a rare moment of vulnerability. "Sometimes, I wonder if it'll ever be enough," Mia confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The resistance, the ignorance, it feels endless." Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "It won't change overnight," he said, "but every step you take brings us closer. Every policy you implement, every mind you change, it all matters." Mia leaned her head on his shoulder, allowing herself a brief reprieve. "I just hope that, in the end, it makes a real difference," she said. "It already has," Ethan said confidently. "You've not only reshaped this airline, you've inspired people to demand better, to expect more. That's a legacy most people only dream of leaving." Mia smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of his words. "You always know exactly what to say," she teased. "It's my job," Ethan replied, grinning. Their shared laughter eased the tension of the day, and for a moment, the enormity of their mission felt lighter. Mia knew the fight for equality was far from over, but with Ethan by her side and the growing momentum behind her, she was more determined than ever. Together, they had turned pain into purpose, and she wasn't about to stop now. Mia Johnson's journey began with a moment of humiliation, an attempt to strip her of her dignity at a boarding gate. But what was meant to diminish her became the catalyst for an industry-wide reckoning. Through her resilience and determination, she transformed that experience into a movement for justice and equality, proving that one voice can create ripples of change. Under Mia's leadership, her airline not only reformed its internal culture, but also set a new standard for the aviation industry. Diversity and inclusion became more than just corporate buzzwords. They became a living, breathing part of the company's identity. Employees and passengers alike began to feel seen, heard, and valued. But Mia's impact didn't stop there. Her work inspired airlines worldwide to adopt similar initiatives, and her voice on the federal task force amplified her mission far beyond the skies. Her policies became a blueprint for industries across the nation, showing that accountability and empathy could coexist with success. Still, Mia knew the fight for equality was far from over. "True change takes time," she often said. "It's not about perfection, it's about progress. And progress requires all of us." Today, Mia's legacy is a testament to the power of courage and conviction. The seeds of change she planted continue to grow, carried forward by those she inspired. Her story reminds us that moments of adversity can become opportunities for transformation if we choose to act. As Mia once said in her keynote speech, "This isn't just my fight, it's ours." Together we can build a world where dignity, respect, and equality are not privileges but rights for everyone. And so, her legacy lives on, a beacon of hope and a call to action for all who dare to dream of a better future.